Hi everybody, welcome. We're going to wait a couple of minutes just to allow people to join. I hope you're all well. Feel free to send a message into the chat to let us know where you're calling in from. Great to see you all, and yeah, we're going to get started in a couple of minutes. Great to see a lot of people calling in from the US already. Anyone from further afield? Give a shout out for the other continents. Oh, we have someone calling in from Brazil, which is fantastic. Anyone in Europe? Give us a shout out. Anyone further east? Got someone from Canada here, Derek. Good to have you. Jill calling in from France. Good to see you, Jill. An undisclosed location in the DMV. Okay, fantastic. So yeah, we've got a good number of participants already, and we look forward to welcoming more as we go along. But I'm going to start off now and just say good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you wherever in the world you're tuning in from, and welcome to this, the first webinar in the new Power Hour series. This is, of course, the Learning Tech Managers Power Hour, focusing on scaling security. Today, we're going to have the panel that you see in front of you, having a lively discussion, as well as a presentation from Mark on the EDUCAUSE 2021 Information Security Horizon Report. And then after that, we're going to have, as I say, a panel discussion. And do feel free whilst that's happening to send in your thoughts or questions into the question box, as we will endeavour to reserve some time at the end for a Q&A session as well. My name's Ben. I'm the regional manager for AVIXA UK and Ireland. It's good to have you all here, so many of you tuning in and saying hi. This webinar, if you're viewing it live, will be worth 1 RU, which will be automatically added to your transcript. And if you'd like to review the webinar at a later date, the recording can be found at avixa.org/webinars. I'm going to mention a couple of links in the introduction here, but don't worry about scribbling those down, because we also have on the call my colleague Carla, who is always in the background making sure everything runs smoothly, and she's going to be posting those links as I mentioned them in the chat, so keep an eye out for those. But before we go around the room and do the introductions, I just wanted to say a little bit about the UNIS Awards. The UNIS Award for Best Overall AV-Enabled Education Space recognises innovative use of audiovisual technology that results in positive results in registered higher education learning facilities, whether that's in classrooms for students and or instructors, or indeed campus-wide. It celebrates great design where AV is an integral component of enabling education to take place in a given space or campus, and both new build and refit are eligible if the AV is included in the complete ideation of the space. Information on that can be found at unis-award.org. The deadline for that is the 26th of February, so the 26th of this month. And as an added benefit, all UNIS awards all the entries for those awards are automatically entered into the AVIXA AV Experience Awards too. And information on that can be found at avxawards.avixa.org. So that's it from me. I'm going to now hand over to our panel, who I'll call out individually and who can give you a brief introduction for themselves. So we'll start off with Frank.
Hi, everybody. I'm Frank Patakawa. I'm an AV design engineer and I work for Diversified. I am also an IT SME and a huge cybersecurity enthusiast. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you very much indeed, Frank. Let's now go to Baz.
Welcome all, glad you have me. I'm working in the Netherlands and in the UK as a coordinator of the Knowledge Exchange, which is a collaboration of 6 national organizations developing and exchanging everything that has to do with open science. So security is part of that. JISC is also one of my employers, and therefore I am the member of the UNIS board on behalf of them. And in that capacity, I lead the work operationally for the SIG experts group.
Thank you very much indeed. Jimmy.
Hey everybody, my name is Jimmy Vaughn. I currently work for Microsoft, but I actually came from a background where I worked for Crestron for almost 20 years. I'm a Crestron Master Certified Programmer. I'm an ex-Microsoft MVP because you can't be an MVP and an employee at the same time, which is a good thing, but happy to be here and share thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jimmy. Over to you, Patrick.
Yes, hi, my name is Patrick Maltus, and I'm enterprise architect at Aalto University here in the north, Finland. And I'm also leading our national special interest group in architecture, and also boss colleagues as UNIS SIG president for the SIG group of architecture, and long background also in mobile operator and entrepreneur and software development. So a lot of things happening in the background.
Thank you very much indeed. And last but by no means least, Mark from EDUCAUSE.
Hi everyone, Mark McCormick from EDUCAUSE, where I serve as the Senior Director of Analytics and Research, calling in from Nashville, Tennessee in the US, and happy to be with you all today.
Thank you very much indeed. And Mark is now going to give us an overview of the EDUCAUSE 2021 Information Security Horizon Report. And I have been informed reliably by all the panelists now that if you would like to get in touch, then LinkedIn is the best way to find them. There's also, they can also be found on Twitter, some of them. So please feel free if you'd like to contact them afterwards to go and search them on those platforms. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mark.
Thank you, Ben. So I'm excited to be here, and I should say this is my first engagement with AVIXA and my introduction to this particular professional community. I would even dare to say, without verifying, that this is perhaps one of the first instances that I'm aware of, at least, of trying to open up some sort of formal collaborative space between AVIXA and EDUCAUSE. So that feels exciting to me as well. But for today, I'm here to provide you with a high-level overview of a new research publication coming out of EDUCAUSE, just published last week, actually. And I'm going to share my screen because I have some slides for you. Okay, so hopefully we're good there. You can see my slide, the intro slide. And I will ask Carla or one of the AVIXA crew to put a link in the chat window to the 2021 Horizon Report that I'll be referencing today. But I'm here to use this report to provide some framing or to help set the table for a larger conversation among our other panelists joining us today. So the Horizon Report, just to give you some quick background, it's a long-standing report series in our community and specifically within our teaching and learning community. And this year actually represents our first look at a topic area outside of the teaching and learning community proper. And we chose information security as our first instance of a non-teaching and learning report. But generally, the name Horizon Report seems to suggest that this report is about the future. What is the future of some slice of higher education going to look like? But that's, I think, a little misleading because really these reports end up being about the present more than anything else. Based on what we think we see happening in the future, what actions do we need to start taking today to prepare for that future or to try to create that future. And so I thought this quote from Dennis Gabor would be appropriate because it really gets at the key idea behind the Horizon Report methodology. The future cannot be predicted, but futures can be invented. Our emphasis in this report is far less on trying to be correct and accurately predicting a single future, and far more on having enough of a sense of what the future could be, or futures could be, to inform action today. We can exert an influence on what will happen. We can take action now to begin preparing for those possible futures, and to the extent we can, work to bring about the future we most desire. So that, in a nutshell, is what the Horizon Report is focused on and what it's trying to provide the reader. And hopefully you all will get a chance to dive into the full report, maybe following this webinar if you haven't already had a chance to look at it, and get far more detail than I'm able to provide within the space of my remarks here. So what is in the 2021 Horizon Report Information Security Edition? Obviously, it's a massive effort by a team of folks on the EDUCAUSE staff, and you can see here the folks on our core team for the Horizon Report, including myself and including the director of our cybersecurity program at EDUCAUSE, Brian Kelly. But the EDUCAUSE staff are not the stars of the Horizon Report show. Everything in the Horizon Report is grounded in the insights provided by a panel of information security experts we've gathered specifically for this effort. This is a core value in the Horizon methodology that is threaded really throughout the report. We gathered these experts together and allowed the ideas to emerge organically from within that group through their responses to our prompts and their discussions and interactions with one another. And in everything our team did in analyzing the data, writing up the results, those inputs were the North Star for us. This report serves as the vessel to hold all the thinking and ideas that really came out of that panel of experts. So the trends and the technologies and practices we highlighted in the report, they're not things that I, Mark McCormick, engineered to be in the report. We didn't sit back and say, well, we need to make sure this gets included. And the panel didn't really talk about that, but we need to put that in. So there's a level of trust you have to have in the methodology that the ideas are going to be there just as a result of the experts you've assembled, who've done way more thinking about things than I have or than anyone else on our EDUCAUSE staff have collectively. It's a risk too, and it's the kind of thing that doesn't really take shape until it's done, and you just kind of have to go along for the ride as it's happening. But I think it provides a really rich resource for our professional communities to draw on, and makes for a great platform for learning and discussion among our communities. So when we asked our panelists about the trends that they see taking shape and that they believe are going to be the most important for the future of higher education information security, we asked them to take a wide view across the landscape of trends and not just to consider those things specifically directly associated with higher ed information security. So we asked them about technological trends, of course, but we also asked them about social, economic, environmental, and political trends as well. To give a more expansive view across the landscape. And these are the trends they identified through those discussions. And you'll see up in the upper right-hand corner there, this year we actually identified what we're calling an Uber trend. And you can see that Uber trend of remote work in that corner because it kept coming up in the panelists' discussions across these different trend categories. And certainly that makes a lot of sense following the COVID-19 pandemic and the seismic disruptions to higher ed. This question of whether higher ed will continue to be remote is on everyone's minds. And there certainly are important implications for information security in that. A remote workforce allows institutions to attract a larger and more geographically dispersed pool of talent. It presents information security staff and leadership with new challenges in figuring out how to manage their teams and build relationships across a remote environment. And of course, with end users like students and faculty relying more and more on personal devices and working from personal spaces and networks like many of us are right now, The scope of privacy and security concerns for the institution is expanding greatly in this environment. So you can see how that single trend can touch on so many different aspects of higher ed information security, and why it just felt to us to be so all-encompassing this year. But looking across the other trend categories, in the social trends, panelists focus on concerns that the supply side of the InfoSec workforce wouldn't be able to keep up with increases in demand in the years ahead. They talked about the proliferation of personal devices and this near constant connectedness and what that means for data privacy. And they discussed the growing market power of big tech vendors and the diminished, the potential of diminished agency and autonomy of individual institutions in things like negotiating contracts. In the technological trends, panelists focused on the expansion of institutions' security borders through cloud-based services and endpoint mobility. They talked about security incidents becoming more sophisticated and more routine, and as a result of that, needing to become more of a focus in institutions' normal day-to-day business planning and operations. And again, in the space of this trend category, they talked about that proliferation of personal and mobile devices and virtual modes of working and learning. For the economic trends, their discussions focused a lot on what institutions' business models are going to need to look like in the future and how information security units are going to navigate those future models, especially when you consider factors like shrinking enrollments and shrinking budgets and the possibility of more complex, complicated business models like mergers or acquisitions and the implications of that for data security and information security. The environmental trends, I think, it was interesting. That seemed to be the most challenging for the panelists to identify and think through, because it may not always be at the forefront of our thinking, or some of those connections may not seem as direct or obvious. But anywhere you start talking about demands for new or more types of data, or innovations in institutions, technologies, or systems infrastructure, you inevitably broaden the scope of the institution's privacy and security vulnerabilities and concerns. And so as institutions learn to adapt to climate change or protect themselves against extreme weather or climate conditions or events, you'll see the need for enhanced security to be an important dimension of those changes and adaptations. And finally, we did venture boldly into the tricky area of political trends. And here our panelists focused on international differences in data control and regulations. They talked about the expansion of disinformation through things like deepfake videos and social media and the weaponization of those things. And of course, they discussed international relations and the need for monitoring and protection against cyber threats on the international stage. So this is how these trends show up in the report. We discussed briefly what the impacts of each of the trends could be on higher ed information security, and we provide a few bits of evidence that seem to indicate that these trends are indeed taking shape. Following their discussion of trends, we asked our panelists to think about the technologies or practices that are emerging now, or perhaps they've been around for a while, but they're becoming more important now, and that would be shaping the future of higher ed information security and would become more important in the years ahead. So in these discussions, these are the technologies and practices they identified, these 6 listed here. They identified cloud vendor management. Of course, cloud-based solutions are becoming more and more important for institutions as more efficient, more cost-effective approaches to meeting their needs. But this elevates the importance of managing those vendor relationships and vetting and selecting vendors, which of course should include risk assessment and evaluations of things like data security and incident response. They talked about endpoint detection and response. As we know, endpoint devices are a big area of vulnerability, and the web of endpoints in higher ed is expanding and is likely only to continue expanding. And so endpoint protection solutions are obviously an essential part of the institution's security posture. Multi-factor authentication, single sign-on with the number of devices and applications and systems that faculty, staff, and students access on a daily basis increasing and continuing to increase in the future. The demand for more seamless and simplified authentication processes is likely to increase as well. Looking at data authenticity and integrity, of course, this is tied up in endpoint protection and authentication as well, but there will be a need to focus on the data itself and thinking about things like data validation, archiving of data, and verification of system inputs. They identified research security as an important area of technology practice for the future. As we know, research is becoming more dependent on high-powered computing, digital and cloud technologies, and as it continues to rely on funding and relationships with government and industry partners as well, as it has for many years, will be viewed more and more as an area of security risk for the institution. And then finally, they talked about student data privacy and governance. We've done research over the years at EDUCAUSE on student technology use. Generally speaking, today's students are aware of the risks of institutions using their personal data. They're discerning about which types of data they want their institution to collect and use. At the same time, though, students report being ignorant or unaware about how their institution is using their data and how it benefits them. I think which can undermine their trust and confidence in their institution to use and protect their data. So there's this expectation in the future for institutions to collect and use their students' data safely and securely, and institutions need to have the appropriate policies and protections in place, of course, to ensure that. So this is how these technologies and practices show up in the report. We provide a broad overview. We also include it with a few exemplars of specific things that case study institutions are beginning to explore or implement in relation to that technology or practice. We also have, we report on how the panelists scored each of those technologies and practices along several dimensions, including cost, risk, the impact on that institution's information security. Real quickly, and then I'm going to hand the mic over to the other panelists, but the last few sections of the report, we have the scenarios section, which is where we get to take all those bits and pieces I've just summarized and organize them into a little bit of a fun, creative writing exercise. So given all those things and what our panelists observe happening and taking shape, what does the world look like in 10 years? And it's not intended to be science fiction, fantasy, like Blade Runner or the Jetsons, but reasonably, what sorts of things could we expect based on what we know today? And we imagine those things along these 4 archetypes for the future of growth, constraint, collapse, and transformation. And you can get a better sense of what all that means in the actual text of the report. And then finally, we invited some of our expert panelists to write essays on what they see as the implications of these trends and texts and practices on the future of information security in higher ed in their particular context, whether it's a particular type of institution or region, how they see these things impacting information security higher ed in their world. And so for this year's report, we have some essays along these categories here. And with that, setting the stage, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand the mic over to the rest of the panel.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. That was really interesting, and I think it's yeah, certainly going to be a really wonderful document. And if anyone here would like to see more information on that, then as we said earlier, the link will be in the chat. It's in there now, and we'll post it again right at the end. If you have any questions about that, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box, and Mark can answer those. Or indeed, you can find Mark on LinkedIn, and he or one of his team can contact you and discuss that further. But I do encourage everyone to go and read that, because it looks super interesting. So thank you very much again, Mark, for taking the time to give us that overview.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Of course, we're here to talk about security, and we're in great company. So thank you to the panel for virtually coming back to the room. And I'd like to just dive in and ask a question. And I'm going to aim it towards Patrick and Jimmy, because we were having an interesting discussion about this earlier. But I think one of the main sort of challenges and aims of security, especially cybersecurity, is to sort of prevent the unauthorized gathering of information. But is it fair to say that unauthorized gathering of information always exists at some level?
Yeah, I can start that, and let me first set the stage, and I think Jimmy can then answer the things I put on the stage here. That if you look at my university here, we have one of the largest European startup community. We do groundbreaking research. And just to give a few examples, in material design, nanotechnology, miniature satellites are built and sent up to the sky. We have, as a technical university, most of the Nokia engineers studied at our university. We have very advanced equipment. We have a subway station in the center of our campus area, and over 30,000 people flow with an open LAN at the campus. So what do you think? Do we have unauthorized gathering of information in our environment? There are indications that that is happening, but perhaps Jimmy, you might address those things also.
Yeah, there's, I mean, you know, whether it's unauthorized gathering of information or just people actually seeing if they can get in. I mean, the truth is that people are just out on the web and they're searching for things. And if you've got firewalls that are breached, if you've got different things that can go in, yeah, the first person can do it. They can publish something on it. I think I saw a report a few weeks ago that basically said that there's some of the known entities have as many as 7 attacks per second. And as everybody moves to the cloud, security is a main reason why people did not move to the cloud early on in the early 2000s. There was fear, there was misinformation, there were things out there, and things like multi-factor authentication and things like that are put into place. It makes getting the information, even for those that are authorized, a little bit more difficult. And by making it easy, we make it exposed and we allow people to get in. Now, are they using it for unauthorized access? Are they doing that? There is a large amount of that going on, but there's also the people that just do it just to do it. You know, whether it's kids in their bedroom. I mean, you know, Ben, I think one of the things that all of us on the panel actually understand is you can go on the internet, you can search a well-known port for products that are out there. And if you search a port, chances are you're going to find thousands of devices that have the default username and password. So what's the first thing that people should do to even secure any kind of information? Is change that default username and password. And you know, it's an obvious thing, but so many people don't do it. And then they're looking behind themselves after they get that unauthorized access and they think about, well, what could I have done differently? There's a lot of things you could have done differently, and it's too late by the time that you realize that, yeah, they've gotten in.
Yeah, and I agree. And then perhaps one of the biggest breach we have had in our country is basically being that the default password for the SQL database was SASA. So what can you say?
Change your password.
Yes, it's certainly difficult when you're coming up against challenges such as these. You know, ones which, you know, when they're not met, can be so colossally damaging, but are so easy to fix. Yeah, it's obviously it's an uphill struggle, and I think it leads me quite nicely onto a question I really wanted to ask to Frank, our self-proclaimed cybersecurity enthusiast, shall we say, which is, I mean, obviously security chains, if you'd like to call them that way, security protocols and all that, can be weak, they can be strong, there's varying degrees, but what would you say is potentially the weakest link in any security chain?
Thanks, Ben. I think the answer is going to be pretty obvious, coming from the side that of technology that I stand with. But I'm going to start off my response by first of all thanking Mark for his excellent presentation. If the listeners and viewers have not already downloaded it, please go and check out the link. It is an extremely well put together document. And I'm saying this because I spent the entire weekend reading through it. So it's really amazing. It has a lot of good information. And coming back to the question, Ben, I'm going to start off with a little quote by Bruce Schneier, who is a very famous person in the cybersecurity circles. And one of the things he said was, if you think technology can solve your security problems, then you don't understand the problems and you don't understand the technology. So the weakest link is always and always going to be the human component. And just like Patrick and Jimmy were just saying about password changes and all the other things that happens in a wide number of breaches that we come across every day, it's the humans, because technology can be secured. There are parameters that we can set on devices, on boxes that can easily be manipulated. We can fix it. We can work around it. There's encryption. There's a ton of things that we can do. But how can you fix the human component? There is no software upgrade to help the people out there in the 21st century understand that every single conversation that you have in a public space, every single time you step out in a restaurant and you have a loud conversation, every time you go into a library, every time you're at a public place, you are a potential target. Now, I know the most common response to this is, well, I've got nothing to hide. I don't have much of value. You'd be surprised, what people find as value. So I want to take this chance to kind of like set the record straight. And the target of our conversations is that we need to target these biases, the way we look at things, our preconceptions of what exactly is security. By putting in a $10,000 or $100,000 piece of gear that is supposedly a great firewall, we do not necessarily secure anything. I think the onus lies on the tech managers to implement a path of awareness, of training, of basically uplifting the people and their perspectives towards security. And it is unfortunate, as tech managers commonly say, if it has electricity on it, it's the tech manager's responsibility. It's going to be a little bit more harder because in the future, not only are you going to be responsible for things within your boundaries with the trends, and I'm going to, throw out 100 different trends and, catchphrases out there, 5G, IoT, working from home, all those good things that we talk about every day, we know it. It just increases the responsibility on the tech managers to come up with the policies and the strategies to target the things that we do every day, but now you got to do it on a bigger scale. Now you're responsible not just for the security within your universities, your institutions, you're also looking at that person who's logging in from home, best practices, putting in the documentation necessary. So it's a very challenging perspective. And again, it's not just about pushing out the documentation, it's about getting people to understand this is for your own good. I'll give you an example that I say a lot, and that's going to be I'll kind of round off my response to this question with that. If you set a password policy where you have to change it every 90 days, I know tons of people who go in and change one number on it, go from rabbit 1 to rabbit 2 or rabbit 3. So technically, yes, you fulfill the requirement of your software, but you have not fulfilled the security requirement there. So there's a human component to this. And the only way to get it out is, panels like this. I'm hoping that the people listening to this understand that the human component is always going to be the weakest link, and any action that we take needs to start there, ground up.
Yeah, certainly. And I think, I'd like to chuck a question out to the whole rest of the panel as well, which is because it was going to be a follow-up question of mine from what Frank was saying about, certainly if the human component is always the weakest one, then what do? We try and strengthen that component, through training and through awareness and stuff like that. Have any of you here sort of gone through that challenge, tried to increase that awareness, and if so, have you seen successes, or have you just seen failures that you can't seem to overcome? What's been the sort of experience when trying to increase the strength of that weak component? Anyone, please feel free to jump in.
If you allow me, one example I can tell you about is the University of Maastricht in the Netherlands, who around Christmas has been hacked, and it was a ransom attack. So there was a lot of money asked to release the systems. And what they did is they made the choice to really open up and explain what happened to all their colleague universities. They really raised awareness of where it went wrong, what they could have done and what they should have done, and shared that with all the universities. So in that moment, enormous awareness nationally was brought together. Sad thing is that it didn't really help. Last week, in 1 week, we had attacks to another university of Amsterdam, NWO, that's our national research funder, was hacked as well. And also in a hospital, the medicine distribution robot was hacked. And these are all parts of the same academic world, which shared, by the reasons of this Maastricht attack, all this information. So even if you take action, you're not safe yet. And I think if you talk about awareness, I think we all underestimate still how often this happens successfully. I mean, you can say we got 5 attacks a day, but in the Netherlands, you get, let's say, a successful attack in a university every day. So those numbers, we really have to put them up. So that's my response to this part of the discussion.
So as well as making sure that people receive training and increase the awareness of it, it's also really important to share the failures, if you like, to share the experiences.
But think about this. Think about you know, as everybody moved to the cloud, multi-factor authentication became a thing, and that's basically the idea. I know a thing and I have a thing, and those two things should be independent of each other. But a lot of even people that are putting in multi-factor authentication or thinking that they're putting in multi-factor authentication, they never adhere to I have a thing. You know, some people will say, okay, a text message is good enough, and that's what it is. Well, what if that's not good enough? What if you have to actually log into somewhere and go through things, or you have to basically enable multi-factor authentication? I know cloud services are basically moving towards multi-factor is the default now, instead of allowing people to not have multi-factor and then go through. I mean, you know, everybody in the world has heard about their Apple password, you know, somebody's Apple account being hacked and you know, pictures being leaked and so on and so forth. Apple now requires you to actually have that multi-factor authentication on, where you must know something and then you have something. Most of the time it's your iPhone or your iPad or something like that. But movements like that are necessary to secure the data before it goes out. And as soon as a lot of people see that challenge come into play and they say, well, not everybody's going to have their cell phone with them, or not everybody's going to have it, then they go ahead and they say, oh, okay, we'll just make it easier for everybody. And guess what? Making it easier makes it easier for everybody, not only the person that it's intended for, but everybody else as well.
Yeah, so yeah, go for it.
I was just going to chime in with my perspective as a researcher and say that I love to begin at the point of listening to the end user and understanding where they're coming from, what their pain points are, what maybe they're resistant to, and enabling your institution to then take a more tailored approach to better supporting and equipping those end users, that human element, to be able to adapt and use things well and safely.
And
Certainly, yeah.
well, and I think one important thing is also that we have also changed the way we think about. I mean, we used to speak about that you need to have super long passwords and you would need to change them every 2 weeks, which is actually absolutely countermeasure to security. And I think we have finally understand that, okay, it's good to have long passwords, but the longer you have, the less you need to change them. And the short, the longer password is not the problem. It's actually that people don't remember their password, so they, so to say, undermine the security protocol by putting something easily readable somewhere. So again, it's not Frank was absolutely bringing it up. It's not a technical measure that will usually fail. It's the human that will fail in implementing or following that security track. And I think that's where we really today need to be, that the security needs to be easy to be implemented, easy to use, but hard to crack. And that's, I think, a very, very tough nut to crack.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think it's just the fact that, you know, you would have thought that cybersecurity was probably the furthest thing away from human emotion when you're going to compare two concepts. but in fact they're so intertwined, and like you say, people aren't going to put long passwords that they can't necessarily remember. Some people are afraid of storing their passwords because they're worried that that's a form of they just don't trust it. They don't trust the fact that their password isn't only written down on a piece of paper in their wallet, or on a password protected document on their desktop, or whatever it might be. So people, they don't go for those suggested strong passwords and add them to their stored password list or anything like that.
I think Scene has a good question in the chat, and if I may answer that also, and you were asking there, what's the likelihood of risk from external threats as opposed to internal threats? I would say it depends on which threat. If you look at most of the data leakage, which concerns customer data and also financial data, those, according to reports we have seen and the cases been looking at, is that mostly it's an inside job in most cases. But if you look at ransomware and you look at these type, like Jimmy was addressing also the fact that most configuration are like really simple to crack. Those like closing and the cryptographic parts, those are usually coming from external. But when we talk about customer data, about IPRs and financial data, those usually have an inside man, so to say, taking advantage of weak configuration, weak audit control.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, Sean, I know we tend to look at things from an internal external perspective, but the modern generation of users, I think we have to look at it more holistically, in the sense that it's not about where the origination point of the threat vector is. It's that we have to look at security as an ecosystem. So what is part of your ecosystem is the question. Is an external user a part of it? So yes, then he's part of it. Do vendors come into play? They're a part of it. So the way we approach it needs to be holistically, by taking into consideration anyone, anywhere, at any point of time is a potential threat, which is why we have new security perspectives like zero trust architecture, where people only give security access based on the necessities. There's no single solution to any of these things. I mean, we can all talk about this for hours and hours. There's no way to solve security. It needs to be a customized solution, like Mark said, based on the end user. So listening to them and understanding where their applications are and how we target that is probably the only way to make ourselves sure. There's no way to ensure that we'll be secure 100%, but we can always minimize the risk.
For sure. I did just want to, I think it's a good opportunity. Usually we'd wait right to the end for doing all the questions from attendees, but there's just one coming from Vincent Cartwright, who sends in a question which I think is quite relevant to this part of the discussion, which is, Vincent says, I'm newer to the security side of my organization. Where are the best places to start learning? Who wants to grab that one?
I would even say your best part to start look around your house at all the technology that you have around your house. What's exposed? Guess what? Everybody's got a microphone. I hear people that are worried about, oh, well, I'm not going to put in one of the Amazon or Google or those kind of solutions and everything else. But yet everybody that's complaining about that has a cell phone on them and has the microphone looking at them as well. So there's a great place to start looking around your own environment and say, hey, where do I have some risk? Where do I have things? And to Frank's point, I mean, if you're going out to a restaurant and you're having a loud conversation and you're giving up personal information about yourself, that's a risk right there. So there's a lot of, we can take the technology, which there's places to go and learn. I think AVIXA has some courses that they give on how to secure things, how to secure AV devices. I know that Microsoft gives a whole lot of free learning environments. If you go to Microsoft Learning, you can actually go through Azure training and things like that, which gives you the ideas and the basis for cloud security and how they're actually secured, and what the keywords are, and your technology and your jargon inside of that area. But yeah, the web is probably one of the places that that I would start, and I would start looking around and thinking, what about my my router? How did I secure my router at home? Do I have the same password that I have for my router as my email address? Everybody that's going through, Apple actually just started doing something right now where they notify you that, hey, this password has been used in a hack and we have seen it. Do you want to change it? How many people just sort of go, okay, well, that's not my problem right now, I'll fix it later and everything. But you're exposing yourself and you're going through it. Now take that on a scale that a university has, and you've got, you know, a couple thousand people, and if everybody goes through and goes, oh, I'll take it later, now you've got a situation that you'd have to start looking at.
That's very interesting, and I think yeah, I was just, it's funny you should mention that, because I was horrified to receive that notification a couple of months ago. You know, this password was appeared in a data leak, you should consider changing it now, view other passwords, and it was like 30 of my accounts, which all had various, and you, not only does it make you think, okay, wow, I need to yeah, I need to do something about this, but also the fact that so many different accounts which don't necessarily have a link have all been apparently involved, you know, and it just goes to show that it brings it home, really, because the whole idea that the stat you were saying about seven attempted attacks a second, or whatever it was, you think, wow, that's an interesting thing. But it's not happening to me. It's just in like corporations. It's like these big, you know, these bigger offices and stuff like that. It's that's a crazy stat. Of course, it's going to be the case, but in fact, it could potentially be happening. So it's always good to you know, to be safe. And that kind of notification really brings it home, I think.
If you allow me, Ben.
Yeah, go for it.
There is this element, the human again, there is this element, we are supposed to trust our environment. We are supposed to be transparent and open, share, connect, expose ourselves. I heard the word you said, Jimmy. And people are doing that until they notice that there is a backside. And there is a big example in research, open science currently, where it's now known that all the researchers and the research is tracked by, for instance, vendors or organizations or countries or governments, and in the end has a result that some research is not going to happen. Some research don't have a career. And that type of security and privacy, it happened until the people that are the victim of it finally realized it. And what you see now is there's a big movement emerging in Germany, in the UK, in the Netherlands, where they say, stop tracking research. Well, can you imagine when we 20 years ago said, let's have the open science cloud, and now we entered the point that the researchers are uniting themselves to say, let's stop the tracking. And I think if you talk about security, that is another aspect. Sometimes you're entering a security risk by doing very normal things and not having any opportunity to protect yourself. You just fill in a form and it gets misused because this trust doesn't exist behind the scenes. It's all fake. There's the word.
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting point, and Baz, it's something I wanted to ask you about as well with your background. Obviously, as you say, the current trend is for everything to be sort of open, but also without anything being misused, if you like. But how do we tackle that challenge? Do you see a way to approach that?
Well, I would be beyond my league to say that I would be able to do that. What I do know is that more and more stakeholders at national governance level are discussing how they can, let's say, protect the public values, how they can keep the ownership of public data public instead of in the hands of monopolists that we all know about. So there is at least a awareness on that level, a consciousness that there is a danger, a flip side, so to say, to all this transparency and openness if it's not controlled by ourselves, because that is the biggest danger. And of course, you can say China, or you can say Apple and Microsoft even, but as I would not blame at this time, but I do see the risk, and I notice that governments and national infrastructure organizations are really engaging in this and see this as a security risk, but then the security of public values.
Yeah, and yeah, that's very true. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. First of all, I just want to say, mention a comment that's coming from Robert Kennedy, which starts off a great conversation. I should have taken notes from the beginning. So thank you all to the panel for that. And just want to let Robert know that the webinar is being recorded. So you can view it again within about 5 days time at avixa.org/webinars. And I believe Carla's already stuck a link in the chat there to do that. But again, a message to anyone who wasn't here right from the beginning. If you'd like to review this and you feel that you might have missed something, you should have been taking notes, you can visit avixa.org/webinars to see this again, and feel free to review this recording, and also share it with any colleagues who might be interested, because it's obviously a conversation that's really important when we're talking about security. I want to, with the last sort of 10 minutes that we've got, I want to go to a couple of questions that have come in. This first one is coming from an anonymous attendee, but it says, from the AVIXA industry standpoint, and I'm going to just address this to the panel, obviously, but are AV manufacturers actively working on security? Often it's the devices that are lagging behind and don't offer the proper security options. So those implementing the devices have no choice but to be less secure. What are your thoughts? And anyone, please feel free to jump in to answer that.
I'll take a crack at that. In my opinion, manufacturers are not lagging behind. I think they've caught up. I mean, there was a point of time when there were several AV devices that we would identify as potential threats. But over the last couple of years, especially with the proliferation of UC and how platforms have taken over the way we deploy things, they've stepped up their game. There's a lot of, I've as an integrator, I've seen a lot of effort from manufacturers coming in with fulfilling these security requirements. Again, it's not universal. It varies from manufacturer to manufacturer. I think the responsibility there, unfortunately, lies with the integrators, the end users, and the people who are the middlemen for this to come in and use their information and their knowledge of security to come back and say, well, you know, this is not going to cut it. There should not be a scenario where we are compromising on security to fulfill a need, because there are options out there. So again, this is a holistic conversation where the end user also needs to chime in and say, these are your options. And I think we touched on it several times during the course of this. We were talking about functionality versus the practicality in terms of practicality in any sense. And that's basically security in a nutshell. If you make things too secure, people will just end of the day say, hey, you won't be able to send that email to me, just send it to my Gmail account. And there goes your 2-year security training awareness process. Send it to my Gmail. You're done there. On the other hand, when you're implementing solutions that are going to an end user and you're trying to put together something that is secure, it's about functionality. It's also about understanding what there is. Again, there's no way to shy away from this. And coming back, I would also suggest, there's several suggestions for training that our wonderful panelists have put in there. Go to all of them. This needs to be an organizational thing. I would even go ahead and say budgets need to be allocated so that people are more trained in security. And that's the only way you can take it. It's not about finding that one box that's the most secure. It's about finding the solution that checks all the boxes. This is just my perspective on it.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Frank. Please, Jimmy, feel free to jump in.
I'll jump in from the manufacturer standpoint. I mean, personally, I think a lot of people that know me in the industry relate me back to Crestron. And I taught 17 years at Crestron Masters. Every year was an IP Ethernet discussion that I taught at Masters. And I'll be honest with you, I even had to drag some people at Crestron through the mud and say, you know what, We need to do Ethernet, and we need to do it right, and we need to do things, and we need to fix this. We need to do A, B, and C to basically make sure that it's out there. And what would a lot of people do? They'd come back to us and they'd say, well, you know, I don't like that you have to put a password on the processor anymore. So we gave them the option to sort of take it off. So as much as manufacturers are out there saying, hey, we should do this, there's also people out there that are saying we should make it easy. And I know that we probably have a lot of education, higher ed people around the world that might be joining us right now. And how many people in higher ed are just putting a device and giving it a public IP address? Not even securing it at all. I mean, you know, many universities go out there and they say, oh, well, we're just going to use a public IP address because that's the way that it's been here forever. And then something happens where a student sort of hacks into a phone or something else because everything's out there online, and then they have to take action. Well, if everybody has to take a reactive sense to this, your security's not there. And this is sort of a wake-up call, and sort of, you know, I think all of the panelists here are sort of saying to people, don't react, proact, and be proactive about this, and make sure that you understand what you're doing. One of the famous hacks that actually happened over the last couple of years was over an Ethernet network inside of a casino, and nobody knows how many millions of dollars they actually stole. But what was it? Well, somebody gave out the Wi-Fi password to a vendor who was setting up a fish tank, and the fish tank actually connected wirelessly to the network and was able to then breach into the financial information of the casino itself. And they made out a whole thousands and millions or whatever dollars that they got it, and they got it through this fish tank. You know, to Frank's point, one little slip, let me give you this password, and bam, they're vulnerable. So there's things that you have to be proactive about, but you cannot say we've done everything, we're good, we're done. 7 attacks a second on even the smallest corporation, somebody's going to find a way in, and if you don't know where that is, then you're exposed.
It adds a whole new meaning to the term phishing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When you look at something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, if you allow me to summarize in 4 words the strategy. I mean, you said it, be proactive. In the experts that I speak, they say you have to detect and also preserve your history. You have then to know how to act if something happens, and practice all day long. So that is, in a nutshell, you have to put in a lot of effort on all these things. And that is an awareness that is growing, that it's indeed not just responding, but you have to be so alert.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a couple of minutes left, and there's one question that's come in from Atkins, and he's got a question here. He does mention a manufacturer there, so I'm not going to mention specifically the manufacturer, but it's just a question about something being the new normal. And he says, I'm curious on the panel's thoughts on cloud monitoring services for AV gear and how safe they are. For instance, we're evaluating a certain manufacturer, which is a cloud-only monitoring solution. We currently use a different company with an on-premises solution, but this new company, there is no on-premises option. Should this be a non-starter, i.e. something that I guess they don't use, or is this just the new normal?
So any of the cloud services, and I'll jump in here, any of the cloud services that these AV manufacturers are doing, they're not building their own cloud service. They're actually piggybacking on something that's out there, whether that's AWS or Azure or something like that. They're using those security protocols to do it. That doesn't mean that they're okay. That just means that they're using a preset can of security to sort of do that. Is it the right way? There's no other way around this with the cloud. You've got to basically do it. And nobody in their right mind, there's no manufacturer in the world that's going to say, we're going to build a cloud service from the ground up for just AV. They're going to piggyback on a known service that's out there. There are different ways to architect things. There are different libraries that can be included for the cloud, and different ways of sort of doing things. For instance, I'll go back to Crestron. I worked for them for 20 years. They took Azure, and they built XIO Cloud right in Azure. But it doesn't sit inside of your tenant. So, so there is a challenge there with some corporations. And when we talk about governments and things like that, there's GCC cloud services that are out there that are strict with it has to live in this tenant only, and this is where we're going to live. And then people try to get exemptions and say, oh, well, we want to use XIO, so let's get an exemption for this and put this here and maybe have some cross-tenant availability. The minute that you do that, there's implications there, and your InfoSec guys need to understand exactly what those implications are. So I think cloud is here to stay. I think anybody that doesn't think that cloud is here to stay is a little naive and sort of living in the IR and RS-232 days. But I think it's here to stay, and I think everybody's got to have a conversation about it, and you have to be knowledgeable about it.
May I just add a short comment to you, Jimmy?
Absolutely.
I think the key is, well, we were speaking about that already earlier. It's about trust. I mean, who can you trust? But trust is not everything. It's also, the devil is in the detail. So anytime, and I must say, most of the SaaS services in the cloud are more secure than your own services in general. I mean, that's because most of the providers just have more money and time to spend on those features there. However, the most insecure part is basically the add-ons you put there, because those ask the most rights to be used, because they are quickly done. You want things done. They are usually from a third party, so they shortcut that whatever they. We recently had an add-on to one of our platforms that actually was asking to have access to every email box in our environment. So, and that was out of the box. I mean, there was nothing malicious or anything, but it was just configured the way. So that's what perhaps you should or really look at, that what are the add-ons that you're using in combination with these sort of productized platforms, and then see how their rights, so to say, are built. And there is where I would start, especially as an architect. I usually always look at those add-on third-party components, because they are not usually in line with the architecture of the SaaS platform, and there is, so to say, some type of glue. And if that glue is not really good, then that's where the things break down.
Absolutely. And with that, I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time. I wish we could continue this conversation. I'm sure it would be possible to go on for another hour or two. Perhaps we should organize a reunion at some point, a sequel to this one. But until then, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you, to Mark, Frank, Patrick, Jimmy, and Baz for being here, for taking the time to discuss these issues. We've had really good response in the chat, great feedback, some great questions as well. So thank you to everyone who participated, and a solid attendance as well. You all really kept their attention for the whole time. So thank you very much indeed. Our next Power Hour webinar will be on the 22nd of March, same time, same place. If the person in the background, Carla, who's always running these webinars so well, could post the link to register for the next one. If you haven't already, that would be fantastic. And yeah, the only last thing to say is thank you indeed to all of the panelists, to Carla as well for running things so smoothly, and to all of you attendees for coming. Please feel free to go and review the webinar at avixa.org/webinars. No need to take notes this time around. Go and look at that again, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. But until then, again, thank you everyone. Stay safe, stay well, and we will see you on the next one. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Ben. Thank
Thanks
you all.
Thank you.